CBS.
CBS News Miami, powered by CBS 4 News. Get closer to the big stories, breaking news and weather live as it happens. Stream the local team you trust on the CBS News app. Download.
Good morning and welcome to CBS News Mornings. It is just about 7 o'clock here in New York City. I'm Anne-Marie Green, and here's a look at the stories grabbing our attention right now. Ukraine's president returned to his government office Monday, sending a defiant message that Ukraine will not cower to Russian aggression. Western nations are weighing humanitarian values against economic uncertainty over oil and inflation. And we are taking a look at stakeholders across the conflict and what it could mean for your bottom line. Well, the world has reached a sad new milestone for COVID-19 as a new study reveals new information about the potential impact of the virus on the brain. And we are following new developments this morning in a school shooting that left one teen dead and two others fighting for their lives at an Iowa high school. Plus, the war on Ukraine and information. We take a closer look at how high-tech vigilantes are beating Putin at his own misinformation game. And the photo scene around the world. We hear from the photojournalist whose chilling image shocked the world.
When we were told that we could run across the street by our security advisor, I ran and I saw this family splayed out, and I saw these little moon boots and puffy coat, and I just thought of my own children, of course, and I thought, you know, it's disrespectful to take a photo, but I have to take a photo. This is a war crime.
She shares her heartfelt dilemma after becoming a historian of the present-day crisis in Ukraine. But before all of that, as Russia's invasion continues in Ukraine, President Zelensky is criticizing Russia for breaching a temporary ceasefire to allow civilians to flee from cities. Now there is cautious optimism that a new one will be implemented and it will stick. So Laura Podesta has the details.
Posting a video from his office, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he's staying in Kyiv as long as necessary to win what he called a patriotic war. An advisor to Zelensky said there was progress during a third round of talks with Russia yesterday on establishing humanitarian corridors, allowing civilians in some cities to escape. Russia said it would open passages into Russia and Belarus, but Ukraine wants routes to the west.
The bottom line is more civilians are being killed.
Pentagon spokesman John Kirby says Russian troops have become frustrated by their lack of progress and have increased their reliance on long-range missile attacks that hit schools and hospitals.
They are having fuel problems. They are having food problems. They are meeting a very stiff and determined Ukrainian resistance.
Bombs could be heard going off near this children's holiday camp, now acting as a shelter.
Please help us, I ask you. Next could be here. I ask you, go now.
In Washington, a bipartisan group of lawmakers supports a ban on Russian oil as a way to put more pressure on Vladimir Putin.
You're doing it to make sure that our American dollars aren't going to support a Russian illegal war in Ukraine.
A new poll shows 7 in 10 Americans support a ban, even if it means higher gas prices. Laura Podesta, CBS News.
So joining me now is the mayor of Rivne, Ukraine, Alexander Tretyak. Thank you so much for joining us, Mayor. Just so people here know, your city is about an hour from the border with Belarus. The population, a little under 250,000 people. What is the situation like in your city right now?
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you and to everybody who following you right now. First of all, I have to say that we are preparing for any situation that can be caused by Russia from Belarus side. Yes, we are just 1 hour from border, and as we see, as our militaries tell us that Belarusians and Russians, they are located around the border, and anytime they can break the border. So we believe that our forces, our militaries, quite enough to stop them and to send them back. But I would love to say that much more difficult situation right now in Kyiv, Kharkiv, Chernihiv. So it's hard to imagine that in 21st century, in the heart of Europe, in Kyiv, we have bloody aggression of Russia. So I just have a lot of questions to world leaders. Don't you see what happened in Ukraine? Don't you see that in the heart of Europe, in capital city Kyiv, just a bloody aggression of Russia? Russia, this is a country of terrorists, and terrorists should be stopped. So I just want to ask, how many more innocent children should be killed until you wake up? So we ask, non-fly zone over Ukraine. If you don't help us, we will do it. But we will do it, of course.
You haven't been mayor for very long. I imagine when you ran for mayor, you promised your constituents, I don't know, a safer city. You certainly didn't promise them a gun if they want one. How much has your job as mayor changed over the past couple of weeks?
This is a good question. Yes. So actually, 100% of my time I use just to build protection around the city. So actually, all my responsibilities related with the military guys right now. So actually, I'm a military guy, and we acting like in wartime. So we build protection walls, we build checkpoints, we teach people how to use gun, we teach people medical help, combat medical help. So everything that's related with a war. Of course, we would love to do many peaceful things, but everything I do now, this is actually everything related with war. Also, I would love to say that, of course, we organizing now a lot of humanitarian aid. We organizing a lot of food to the east of Ukraine. And can you imagine, one of Ukrainian mayors close to Kyiv, Mayor Yuri Prilipko from Gostomel, one of the hottest point of the war with Russia. So he was killed yesterday while he was giving a food, giving a bread for needy people. Can you imagine how cruel Russians are now? How this is a real terrorist. They just killed innocent mayor who helped for his people.
In fact, you know, mayors in cities across the country have sort of been at the forefront of humanitarian aid, protecting constituents, doing exactly what you're doing, providing training and weapons. You must be, when you hear about a fellow mayor being killed while reportedly handing out bread, how concerned are you about your own safety and security? What are you doing to make sure that you're safe?
You know, I'm just trying to be with the people. Every day, I just visit a lot of people in my community. Of course, I don't afraid about my life. As a Christian, I believe that everything in God's hands. But every day, I am with my people, with my community. Today, in the early morning, I was walking around the streets and speaking with people. I was traveling in my city by trolley bus and trying to comfort people, trying to say that, dear friends, dear people of my community, let's keep calm. We win this battle. And, you know, I'm just proud to be a mayor of such wonderful city as my city of Rivne. This is a beautiful people. From the very first day of the war, we sent just tons and tons humanitarian help for needy people at the east of Ukraine.
You are pretty close to the Belarusian border. You know, there had been reports that perhaps the Belarusian troops would cross the border to reinforce and support Russia. I wonder what the relationship had been like before this. With a city so close to the border, were you surprised to hear that Belarusian troops, that there were reports that Belarusian troops may also get involved?
Yes, truly saying, we used to have more or less good relation with Belarus before, a couple of years ago, and of course we have many relation between some relatives, many people who lives here, they have relatives in Belarus and the same. But during last year, when Russia started its aggression and sending its troops to Belarus, and like pretending that it's just training, this is like, don't be afraid, everything is okay. But people of Ukraine, we understood that this is something that Belarus preparing for. So right now, many people just, Belarusians, I keep in touch with some Belarusians, and I ask, don't you see what's happening in Ukraine? Don't you see that Russia use your territory, your everything you have, sending its troops through territory of Belarus to Ukraine? And Belarusians say, "Oh, this is a war you started inside of your country." So they believe, for Putin's propaganda, that this is Ukraine started war inside the country, that this is a civil war. Can you imagine?
Yeah, that's.
And when I show a lot of pictures, video, how Russian aircraft bombing innocent cities, destroying everything, they just say, "Oh, this is your war. This is a civil war." So Putin's propaganda just do evil things.
Yeah,
But anyway,
it is
we believe that.
Sorry, Mayor. It's a war that's happening, outside of your city and around your city, and it's a war that's happening, on the airwaves when it comes to misinformation. And you sort of you paint that picture very clearly. We have to let you go, Mayor Tretiak. I need you to stay safe, and thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Yes. And I want to say thank you so much for CBS News and for every TV channel who show the truth, the real truth. And we have to say, Russia, this is a terrorist country that kill innocent people in Ukraine.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, back here in the U.S., police in Iowa have detained potential suspects, plural, in a shooting outside of a Des Moines high school. A teen was killed in yesterday's shooting, and 2 others are now in critical condition. Students who witnessed the gunfire say they were absolutely shocked.
I was thinking, I don't know if I might die today. I don't know if I might get hurt. I don't know if they're inside. I'm just kind of scared, I'm shaking.
So far, no charges have been filed, and the motive for the shooting is also not known. A federal judge has tossed an obstruction charge against a January 6th defendant. The judge ruled yesterday that Garrett Miller could only be charged with obstruction if he directly recorded or documented events to hamper the ability of Congress to count electoral college votes. Miller currently faces multiple felony charges in connection to the Capitol attack. He's been in jail since the arrest last year. And former President Trump is lashing out at his administration's Attorney General, Bill Barr. It comes after a recent interview about his new memoir, where Barr claimed Trump went, quote, off the rails during his presidency, and that he fell out with the former president over his push to discredit the 2020 election. In a letter, Trump called Barr, quote, slow and a big disappointment. Despite the nasty back and forth, though, Barr said he will still vote for Trump if he becomes the GOP nominee. And you can hear all about the war of words directly from the former Attorney General later on today. Bill Barr will be in studio to talk about his new book, One Damn Thing After Another. WNBA star and Olympic gold medalist Brittany Griner detained in Russia over alleged drug charges. Still ahead, family and friends are anxious for her safe return home. We're going to bring you the latest on the efforts to free her. Plus, the Kremlin is restricting the free flow of information online for Russians as its war with Ukraine continues. We've got details on that. But first, it is 7:13 on the East Coast. Time to check your local weather.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
The mayor, the city council, everything's run by a woman.
Pine Lake is predominantly white, but the surrounding area is 90% black. Somebody's going to get pulled over.
Why are most of the people in the courtroom black? Most of the people in Pine Lake are white.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
Some Republicans are now accusing companies like Twitter and Facebook of targeting conservatives.
They've had unchecked power to censor.
I do not have access to my main Facebook account.
I wasn't given an explanation. I was just like, what did I do?
It's not okay to shut down my voice simply because it's not the same as yours.
How those rules are enforced is something that the rest of us know very, very little about.
The First Amendment protects all of us from the government limiting our speech. The companies have the ability to decide what speech they will allow. They're not the government.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
There is now more than $1.7 trillion in student loan debt.
The punishing price of a college education.
Why are we punishing millions of people because they chose to get an education?
My parents didn't make enough to just write a check and pay for school, and so loans were really my only option.
It just feels like quicksand. It feels like this huge thing I'll never get out from under.
This would be a moment for the federal government to say it is time for us not only to ask for forgiveness, but to extend forgiveness.
There's a cost to forgiveness. Ultimately, taxpayers are responsible for the federal debt.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
The mayor, the city council, everything's run by a woman.
Pine Lake is predominantly white, but the surrounding area is 90% black. Somebody's going to get pulled over.
Why are most of the people in the courtroom black? Most of the people in Pine Lake are white.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
Well, the time now is 12:17 p.m. in London. The UK is one of several nations that have imposed sweeping sanctions on Russia. We'll have more on that a little later this hour. In the meantime, it is 7:17 a.m. here in New York City. CBS News Mornings is back with a look at some of the stories that you may have missed while you were offline. Queen Elizabeth met with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau yesterday at Windsor Castle. It was the Queen's first official in-person meeting since testing positive for COVID-19 last month. Trudeau is traveling across Europe this week to show solidarity amid Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The Biden administration is working on trying to get Brittany Griner out of Russia after the WNBA player was detained at an airport on drug charges last month. Lawmakers from the Congressional Black Caucus discussed the issue with President Biden yesterday. More than 29,000 people have signed a Change.org petition for Griner's safe return. And the global death toll from COVID-19 has surpassed 6 million. That's according to data from Johns Hopkins University. Nearly 1 million of those deaths happened here in the U.S. A separate study released this week found brain scans of people diagnosed with COVID-19 showed more tissue damage and loss of gray matter than those who had not contracted the virus. Well, fighting is ramping up on the outskirts of Kyiv as Russia continues its invasion of Ukraine. Ukrainians are fortifying their capital, and President Zelensky is vowing to stay. Charlie D'Agata is there in Kyiv with the very latest. Charlie, good morning to you. Good morning from here anyways. How close is the Russian convoy from Kyiv?
Oh, well, the Russian convoy itself is pretty much stagnated north of the city. It hasn't really moved. Ukrainian forces have been taking pot shots at it. The foreign ministry or the defense ministry said they've not only sort of hobbled them on the road, but they have flooded the areas around the convoy itself. So some of these vehicles are tracked vehicles. They don't necessarily need a paved road in order to advance, but it has stayed there and stagnated for the past week and a half. And it has not made any progress. It was thought that they would move into combat positions. It hasn't happened yet. And of course, they have resupply and sustainability issues as it goes by day. There's a lot of people. It's a 40-mile convoy. They'll be sleeping in vehicles, and it is easily below freezing here and has been for a number of nights.
So let's talk about the possibility of a ceasefire or these humanitarian corridors. Is any of that going to be happening?
Yeah, Anne-Marie, that is so desperate, and it's desperate in certain areas where the fighting is at its very worst. And we know these cities now. The port city of Mariupol, a ceasefire is in place, but that's the third time they've tried that. In the past, it's only lasted an hour or two before the evacuation route was shelling both sides, blaming each other. Kharkiv, again, a battleground, the second city in Ukraine, second largest city in Ukraine, which has come down, which has been hammered. Sumy, which was in our report overnight, that has been taking airstrikes. A number of civilians have been killed there overnight. So these are the hot spots. Now, so there have been different ceasefire declarations for humanitarian evacuation in those particular cities. They're shaky at best. Fingers crossed. We hear that Mariupol is in trouble at the moment. Kharkiv is in trouble. And we also have to mention, and we've seen these pictures too, in Irpin, which is just outside the capital itself, that bridge that was taken down by the Ukrainians, and people have been trying to cross there. That has come under mortar and firing from the Russians, even as civilians have been trying to evacuate. That is another area, just that one in particular, where a ceasefire has been declared for the safe passage of civilians there. So you may be seeing that there's been a ceasefire around Kyiv, the capital itself. I can tell you for a fact that's not true, and that's not holding, because there have been air raid sirens and explosions here this morning. But in that particular area where there are thousands of civilians who are trapped in Irpin trying to get out as Russian forces are advancing, we got very close there yesterday. That whole area has come under attack. That ceasefire, as far as we know, it's at least holding, partially holding, in order to enable the evacuation of civilians. And just to give you an idea, when these people are being evacuated, they're evacuating to a safer place, meaning here in the capital. So not a safe place, but just a safer place where they were.
Which means they're going to keep running. Let me ask you about this. President Zelensky asked for any foreign fighters who want to join the fight to come. They are showing up. They're showing up at the border with, Poland. After that point, though, Charlie, is there something sort of organized or an established system? How do these foreign fighters get absorbed into this battle?
Well, I mean, they're planning for it. And we talk about foreign fighters. The foreign ministry said last night that we're talking 20,000 foreign fighters, he believes, are either here or on the way here. And then we also have to add the number of Ukrainian from around the world, including the United States, where thousands in itself, who are all flooding in here. Where are they coming from? Well, Bulgaria, Lithuania, Poland, all these NATO partners, these areas around Russia. They appreciate the Russian threat. They want to stand in solidarity to the people of Ukraine. They are here to fight, not necessarily to raise weapons, but to provide medical care, to provide any other sort of support and logistics, because they need the numbers there. But yeah, you're talking about tens of thousands of men and women who are flooding into this area, largely from Poland. And once they get there, there's a system in place to move these men and women forward to where they're going to be needed most. So in addition to encouraging them, it's not just the Wild West to just come in here. They have to be armed. They have to have a level of training. They're going to have to be assigned to certain areas. Largely, that's not in the West, which hasn't come under attack, at least not yet. They'll be pulling back to areas around the capital to reinforce the capital, possibly down to Odessa, which is going to be the next hot spot, Mariupol, Kharkiv, up in the north, Cherniv. Areas where the conflict is taking place and where they need that support most. And you may have mentioned, or we will mention here, President Putin according to the Pentagon, is recruiting his own fighters. And these are fighters from Syria. You remember there's a huge Russian contingent helping out Bashar Assad in Syria during that conflict, in fact, that ongoing conflict. So now it's sort of payback time. So there are Syrian fighters who've been encouraged to come back not to come back, but to come to Russia and Ukraine to join in this fight. And what we've already known is that Chechen fighters are involved. And they are some of the most terrifying people. There are groups here, the saboteurs, and the people who've been taking pot shots at journalists, at Ukrainian soldiers, the people who are infiltrating in Kyiv itself. Those are thought to be largely Chechen gangs who have joined this fight. So it's getting complicated, it's getting multi-layered, and it's going to increase in terms of intensity, especially as we edge toward urban combat, which is what we're all expecting in the next few days and weeks.
Yeah, it sounds like it's going to get even uglier than it already is. Charlie, thank you. So Russia's invasion of Ukraine is actually impacting gas prices here in the U.S. as well. According to AAA, the national average for a gallon of gas is now $4.17, with some states seeing over $5. Meanwhile, the Biden administration is considering an embargo on Russian oil imports. And Weijia Jiang is at the White House with more on the administration's efforts to ease prices. Weijia, good morning.
Good morning, Anne-Marie. Good morning, everybody. It's not just the administration, but Congress is preparing to pass bipartisan legislation to stop buying Russian oil because lawmakers say they don't want any American dollars funding the war. And you're right. President Biden has vowed to do whatever he can along the way to bring those gas prices down. But it is who he is turning to instead of Russia that is raising some new questions. On a video call, President Biden and European allies promised to keep punishing Russia, possibly with a ban on buying its oil. A new national poll shows the majority of Americans, 71%, said they would support the move, even if it meant higher gas prices here in the U.S.
No decision has been made at this point.
Speculation alone caused stocks to tumble Monday on Wall Street, marking the worst day of the year for the Dow and S&P 500, while prices at the pump soared, hitting a 14-year average high of more than $4.
Is there any way to gauge how much pain people should brace themselves for?
I do think that there is a path to potentially seeing, $5 a gallon.
Russian oil only makes up about 3% of U.S. oil imports. But Halima Croft, a commodity strategist, warns if other Western countries also cut off Moscow, the shortage would drive up costs everywhere. Croft says even though the White House is talking to Iran and Venezuela about making up the difference, only one source can offer an instant solution: Saudi Arabia.
And the question is President Biden willing to place the phone call to the Saudi crown prince?
This is all a means of exposing the insanity of U.S. energy policy that forces us to negotiate between one brutal dictator and another brutal dictator.
The White House is pushing back against reports that President Biden is planning to travel to Saudi Arabia to talk about oil, saying there are no such plans as of now. As for Russian oil, some European leaders have already come out to say it's not realistic for them to stop buying it because the economic consequences would be so dire. Now, if the U.S. chooses to enforce an embargo alone, experts say that would have more of a symbolic than a financial impact.
And that exactly was going to be my question to you, whether or not, clearly we're going to feel the pain, but will Vladimir Putin? And the answer is not with us alone. But what does have to be done for the administration to implement an embargo?
Well, the president could take executive action, although the White House right now says that is just part of internal debates. They have not made any decisions. And of course, there is this piece of legislation that could land on his desk. And Jen Psaki was asked yesterday if he would sign it if it did. And she said, well, we don't have any bills right now on his desk. But certainly the president has changed his tune because in the very beginning of all of this, he made very clear that he didn't want to do anything that might cause the prices to go up here at home, which, by the way, as we just saw in those staggering numbers there, that even though no one has officially sanctioned Russian oil, just the uncertainty alone is causing the markets to fall. It's causing the prices to go up. So, the White House is being very realistic about what could happen and trying to be cautious. But again, I think because there is this bipartisan support, because Americans say they wouldn't mind paying more, I think that's why you see President Biden coming around to the idea.
Yeah, you just want it to be valuable. You know what I mean? If we're going to pay $5, let it actually be worth our while and let it be impactful. Weijia, thank you so much.
Sure.
So coming up next, Russia's crackdown on social media amid a war in Ukraine. How the Kremlin is using tech bans to keep news from its citizens. And coming up later on Red and Blue, Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick discusses the need for more military aid after visiting the border between Ukraine and Poland. You can stream that conversation in our 6 p.m. Eastern hour. And be sure to check out 60 Minutes, the most successful broadcast show in television history, is now streaming. You can catch 60 Minutes Tuesday night at 8 Eastern. You can also check it out on demand on the CBS News app.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
The mayor, the city council, everything's run by a woman.
Pine Lake is predominantly white, but the surrounding area is 90% black. Somebody's going to get pulled over.
Why are most of the people in the courtroom black? Most of the people in Pine Lake are white.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
Some Republicans are now accusing companies like Twitter and Facebook of targeting conservatives.
They've had unchecked power to censor.
I do not have access to my main Facebook account.
I wasn't given an explanation. I was just like, what did I do?
It's not okay to shut down my voice simply because it's not the same as yours.
How those rules are enforced is something that the rest of us know very, very little about.
The First Amendment protects all of us from the government limiting our speech. The companies have the ability to decide what speech they will allow. They're not the government.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
There is now more than $1.7 trillion in student loan debt.
The punishing price of a college education.
Why are we punishing millions of people because they chose to get an education?
My parents didn't make enough to just write a check and pay for school, and so loans were really my only option.
It just feels like quicksand. It feels like this huge thing I'll never get out from under.
This would be a moment for the federal government to say it is time for us not only to ask for forgiveness, but to extend forgiveness.
There's a cost to forgiveness. Ultimately, taxpayers are responsible for the federal debt.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
The mayor, the city council, everything's run by a woman.
Pine Lake is predominantly white, but the surrounding area is 90% black. Somebody's going to get pulled over.
Why are most of the people in the courtroom black? Most of the people in Pine Lake are white.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
Welcome back to CBS News Mornings. The time now is 7:33. Let's get you caught up on some of the news that you may have missed. The global death toll from COVID-19 has surpassed 6 million, according to data from Johns Hopkins University. A separate study finds brain scans of people diagnosed with COVID-19 show more tissue damage and loss of gray matter than those who have not contracted the virus. Plus, Russia's invasion of Ukraine is impacting gas prices here in the U.S. According to AAA, the national average for a gallon of gas now is $4.17, with some states seeing over $5. Meanwhile, the Biden administration is considering an embargo on Russian oil imports. And President Zelensky is criticizing Russia for breaching a temporary ceasefire to allow civilians to flee from cities. Both sides are fighting to control the narrative of what is truly happening on the ground in this conflict. So Russia is increasing the pressure on social media sites like Twitter and Facebook. Russian authorities say that Facebook has been blocked. Using Twitter has also gotten a lot harder as the Kremlin works to restrict certain information it has deemed as fake news against its military. So we're going to dig into this a little bit more. I want to bring in Carol Cadwalder. She's a reporter and feature writer for The Observer. Thank you so much for joining us. I found the article fascinating because it really sort of outlines why it is so difficult for Vladimir Putin to control the narrative. It is like trying to hold water in your hand because information sources are everywhere now. But you identify something really, really interesting. In your article, you talk about open source intelligence gatherers, right? These are almost like freelance intel operatives. Can you talk about what they're doing and the impact they're having on the resistance against Russia?
Yeah, so it's a completely fascinating aspect of the war that it's happening, I think, for the first time, I understand, in Ukraine. So it happened in previous conflicts, but not in this way, in this very sort of organized fashion. And what it is, it's people sitting on their computers or on their phones all around the world. They can be anywhere. They can be sitting at their kitchen table or in their armchairs. And they're able to access photos and video footage, which is coming out of Ukraine in real time. It's being shared on social media, in Telegram groups, on Facebook, etc. And people are sort of harvesting, they're logging these photos and these footage. They're able to verify it, to check that they're not fake. They're able to geolocate it, to figure out from various clues where the footage or the photographs are coming from. And then what they're doing is they're all sharing and inputting this information into databases and into maps. And in this way, it's not only a sort of resource for us to be able to see what's going on so acutely on the ground in a way we really haven't been able to do in a war before, but it's also feeding potentially into Ukrainians' military intelligence. So it's actually affecting the course of the war. And so it's as I say, these techniques have been sort of honed over the last decade, and particularly by an organization called Bellingcat, although there are other groups now. And it really does. It's something sort of almost sort of going back to our sort of the early promise of the internet in that it's enabling people, citizens, to use these tools in a way which is constructive and collaborative and is, fighting, evil, essentially.
And so you point out that in a way, Vladimir Putin is kind of like the granddaddy of misinformation. So he's been very successful at this, and now the tables have turned. He's trying to crack down. He's, shut down independent media in Russia. We talked about what's happening with social media sites. Censorship is what he's doing. Is it working?
No. So what we can see is that, as you say, he is the dark master of these dark arts. And it's really important to say that he has been practicing this not just in Ukraine, but across the West. And that's something which I think people don't understand and must be made clear to them, that he invaded Ukraine in 2014. That's when he annexed Crimea. And the prelude to that was these attacks on social media sites, this need to warp reality before he moved in the troops. And in exactly the same month, in exactly the same year, he started doing that in America and across the West. And he did it in exactly the same way, which is that he attacked. It was a military assault on our social media platforms. And this is the thing which I sort of don't feel that people have properly understood. And he's got away with that because it was in darkness for so long. So in America, in Britain, we didn't realize any of this was happening until the FBI started telling us in 2016. And so darkness was really Putin's friend. But now there's all this light being flooded in. And so he's reacting in this incredibly old-fashioned way. You know, the actions we see of him in the last few days, there's something Stalin might have done, you know, shutting down Facebook, criminalizing journalism, making the act of journalism a criminal act, and, you know, closing it down in what is an absolutely totalitarian way. There is something really old-fashioned about this, whereas we're seeing in Ukraine, Zelensky, you know, this popular actor, he really knows how to use social media. He is brilliant at it. He's so flexible and he uses humor and he's there taking his selfies with his phone. And so it's the tables have been turned in a really surprising way, I think, that none of us just even sort of a week or so ago could have imagined.
And Carol, I have to let you go, but one of the other things I thought was really interesting that you pointed out was that part of the reason that misinformation has not been able to take hold is because before, you know, it was disseminated, Americans and others warned that it was coming. You were going to hear lies. You were going to hear false flags. So when it started sort of infiltrating the internet, if you will, people already knew what it was. It's a fascinating article. Carol, I have to let you go. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, switching gears a little bit, today is International Women's Day. So up next in Money Watch, we're going to take a closer look at the economic power of female entrepreneurs. Stay with us.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
The mayor, the city council, everything's run by a woman.
Pine Lake is predominantly white, but the surrounding area is 90% black. Somebody's going to get pulled over.
Why are most of the people in the courtroom black? Most of the people in Pine Lake are white.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
Some Republicans are now accusing companies like Twitter and Facebook of targeting conservatives.
They've had unchecked power to censor.
I do not have access to my main Facebook account.
I wasn't given an explanation. I was just like, what did I do?
It's not okay to shut down my voice simply because it's not the same as yours.
How those rules are enforced is something that the rest of us know very, very little about.
The First Amendment protects all of us from the government limiting our speech. The companies have the ability to decide what speech they will allow. They're not the government.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
There is now more than $1.7 trillion in student loan debt.
The punishing price of a college education.
Why are we punishing millions of people because they chose to get an education?
My parents didn't make enough to just write a check and pay for school, and so loans were really my only option.
It just feels like quicksand. It feels like this huge thing I'll never get out from under.
This would be a moment for the federal government to say it is time for us not only to ask for forgiveness, but to extend forgiveness.
There's a cost to forgiveness. Ultimately, taxpayers are responsible for the federal debt.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
The mayor, the city council, everything's run by a woman.
Pine Lake is predominantly white, but the surrounding area is 90% black. Somebody's going to get pulled over.
Why are most of the people in the courtroom black? Most of the people in Pine Lake are white.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
Today is International Women's Day, and we're taking a closer look at the economic power of female entrepreneurs. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, there are about 12 million women-owned businesses, and that includes both solo practitioners and those who have paid employees. Columbia Business School Associate Professor Mabel Abraham is joining me now to discuss women entrepreneurship or female entrepreneurship. I'm really glad that you're here, and I'm curious about what the current landscape is when it comes to women business owners. I think about the pandemic and how a lot of businesses went under, but also a lot of people took time to start their own businesses during the pandemic. What's the current state of things?
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always really challenging when we think about entrepreneurship because one of the hallmarks of starting a new business is that there's a ton of uncertainty, right? People are trying to assess you and your ideas, but you don't have a proven track record. By definition, you're new. In my research, what I often find is that this is precisely when women face the greatest barriers or biases. When they can't demonstrate that they're going to be a rock star because they haven't done it yet, right? They're just new and entering into this domain. So it's really challenging. And I think the pandemic in a lot of ways actually heightens this uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen next. When is there going to be another wave? And all of this just adds to the building tension or underlying uncertainty that is sort of hallmark in entrepreneurship.
And then what are some of the barriers or challenges women face? I've heard women talk about just the challenge of getting investment money, but what are some of them?
Yeah, so when we think about, for example, accessing capital, it's essentially an evaluation where this person or group of people has a resource that you're looking for, and they're deciding whether or not to share that resource with you. So in my research, what I've shown is that when these evaluations are happening, women tend to be most overlooked under certain conditions. So I'll highlight a couple of those today. So for example, when they're being compared to a large group of other people, when there's a lot of competition, it's more likely that decision maker, that evaluator is thinking, do I think this woman is going to be successful or do I think this man is going to be successful? And it's in those cases that women tend to be the most disadvantaged. So how do you identify opportunities for accessing funding where you're not facing so much competition? Or where you develop a direct relationship with the person who's making their decision, where they can see past your gender and identify that you will be a rock star, so to speak, in the space.
Yeah, for so long, that's been part of the challenge for women that, often these are about relationships. And, if you're not in the same spaces just casually, you don't build those relationships in an informal way. So then how do we change the conversation when we talk about, equality and inequity in entrepreneurship?
I mean, a huge part of this is moving past telling women what they need to do differently and helping change these actual systems, right? So one thing I try to think a lot about is what are the levers that turn these things off? And what we need is these decision makers, the people who are giving access to capital, to think about what can we do to actually reduce these inequities, to make it so that women have a level playing field. Developing relationships is one way of doing that. But beyond that, just how do we make these specific processes and systems in a way that similarly advantages men and women, that helps take off gender as the first lens that we sort of evaluate people through?
Some sort of blind assessment, and I know in different areas that has been tried before. It's an interesting conversation. Professor Mabel Abraham, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
This Money Watch segment has been brought to you by Principal, helping you plan, protect, invest, and retire.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
The mayor, the city council, everything's run by a woman.
Pine Lake is predominantly white, but the surrounding area is 90% black. Somebody's going to get pulled over.
Why are most of the people in the courtroom black? Most of the people in Pine Lake are white.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
Some Republicans are now accusing companies like Twitter and Facebook of targeting conservatives.
They've had unchecked power to censor.
I do not have access to my main Facebook account.
I wasn't given an explanation. I was just like, what did I do?
It's It's not okay to shut down my voice simply because it's not the same as yours.
How those rules are enforced is something that the rest of us know very, very little about.
The First Amendment protects all of us from the government limiting our speech. The companies have the ability to decide what speech they will allow. They're not the government.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
There is now more than $1.7 trillion in student loan debt.
The punishing price of a college education.
Why are we punishing millions of people because they chose to get an education?
My parents didn't make enough to just write a check and pay for school, and so loans were really my only option.
It just feels like quicksand. It feels like this huge thing I'll never get out from under.
This would be a moment for the federal government to say it is time for us not only to ask for forgiveness, but to extend forgiveness.
There's a cost to forgiveness. Ultimately, taxpayers are responsible for the federal debt.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
The mayor, the city council, everything's run by a woman.
Pine Lake is predominantly white, but the surrounding area is 90% black. Somebody's going to get pulled over.
Why are most of the people in the courtroom black? Most of the people in Pine Lake are white.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
The time is 7:50, and this is a live look at New York's Times Square, home of CBS Mornings. Gail is standing by with a preview of the show. Gail, good morning.
Good morning to you, Anne-Marie Green. Ahead on CBS Mornings, Tony leads our Ukraine coverage from Poland. He'll introduce us to some Americans who are traveling halfway around the world to help Ukraine fight for its freedom. And former Attorney General William Barr will be here at the table today. He's talking about his new book and why he doesn't think former President Trump is fit to serve a second term in office. And we're going to talk with professional NASCAR driver, that's Bubba Wallace, about his new Netflix series and his struggle for more diversity on the racetrack. A lot of different sides of Bubba. It's great. We'll see you at 8 o'clock. And Anne-Marie Green, it's good to be with you.
Looking forward to it. See you at 8. We are going to check in with CBS News Miami meteorologist Lizette Gonzalez, who's tracking the forecast for us. A lot of up and down temperatures across the country today.
Absolutely. Good morning, Anne-Marie, and happy International Women's Day and happy Tuesday. You can see that big dip in the jet stream, allowing for those temperatures to plummet. It is a cold start right now in Denver with only 17 degrees. You can see the 20s here through Billings and Minneapolis and Kansas City, Chicago, 30s even into El Paso and Dallas in the 40s, stretching from Atlanta through D.C. and New York City. The sliver of warm air is right across our state here, Florida, waking up to the 70s. And it is a little milder across parts of the southeast and over on the west coast right now, 50 in LA, 42 in Portland. As we take a look at the forecast temperatures and weather conditions expected later today, you'll notice, yes, the snow will be falling for much of the central northern Rockies, and temperatures will remain cold with the 20s and the 30s for the northern tier of the U.S., even 38 in Denver. And then there's rain in Portland. Also for the deep south, you'll notice a very stormy pattern, and temperatures will be milder in New Orleans with 72, 54 in D.C., 47 in New York City with a mix of sun and clouds, but 86 in Orlando and 84 in Miami. As we look at that national map, you'll notice that it is getting active here across Texas and the southeast, and that is where we're seeing the potential for some severe storms.
Tell me more about those storms. You're tracking severe weather in the Gulf Coast as well.
Yes, absolutely. So we have the snow and the rain over in parts of the Great Basin and the Rockies, but turning our attention to the central Gulf Coast, where there is a marginal risk of severe storms today, and that will include parts of even the Florida Panhandle as well as Mississippi and also going into parts of Georgia. We could see some active weather here across much of the southeast. It is certainly going to be a stormy day ahead with the potential for heavy rain and flooding. And as I take you through the future radar, you'll notice those storms that'll be moving from Texas through the Gulf Coast states as we head throughout the morning. Also, you'll notice all the snow falling across parts of the Pacific Northwest and into the central northern Rockies. But as we head into later this afternoon and this evening is when those storms will intensify across the deep south, and then eventually everything is going to start to move towards the Carolinas, the mid-Atlantic, northeast as we head into tomorrow morning.
Yikes. Lizette, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You can catch Lizette and the entire CBS News Miami team on our app. It gives you access to all of our CBS News national and local streams for free anytime, anywhere. As Vladimir Putin continues to deny targeting civilian areas in Ukraine, New York Times photojournalist Lindsay Addario captured a horrifying photo of a family who was killed while trying to flee a town outside of Kyiv. CBS Evening News anchor and managing editor Nora O'Donnell spoke with her.
I went forward and found a place sort of behind a wall and started photographing. And in fact, within minutes, a series of mortars fell increasingly closer and closer to our position until one landed about 30 feet from where I was standing. And it killed a mother and her two children.
Your photo of that family is on the front page of the New York Times. It has been seen around the world. It is proof of civilians being targeted. What did you make of when you saw this family up close?
I mean, I'm a mother and, you know, when I'm working, I try to stay very focused. I try to keep sort of the camera to my eye so I don't think too much. But of course, it was very emotional. First of all, I had just been sprayed with gravel from a mortar round that could have killed us very easily. So I was shaken up. And when we were told that we could run across the street by our security advisor, I ran and I saw this family splayed out, and I saw these little moon boots and puffy coat, and I just thought of my own children, of course, and I thought, you know, it's disrespectful to take a photo, but I have to take a photo. This is a war crime.
It was clear that this was an area full of civilians.
There was no question at all. I mean, this is a place that was well documented. There is Russian military on the other side. Everyone knew this place was for civilians.
And how are you doing, Lindsay?
I mean, you can ask me that in a few months. Right now, I'm just trying to stay very focused and work. And I think it's really important that people around the world see these images. And it's really brave of the New York Times to put that image on the front page. It's a difficult image, but it is a historically important image.
And why do you say it's so historically important?
Because it's a war crime and it's happening. And, you know, I think it's very hard to be in that situation where you witness something and you document it. And I knew the backstory because I was there.
Well, the time now is 7:56. Here's a look at what's coming up today. CIA Director William Burns and other U.S. intelligence agency chiefs head to Capitol Hill. They're testifying before the House Intelligence Committee on worldwide threats. That starts at around 10 a.m. You'll be able to stream it on the CBS News app. Also at 10, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg holds a press conference with the Prime Minister of Latvia and Canada, as well as the President of the government of Spain. And President Biden is gearing up to deliver remarks from Fort Worth, Texas this afternoon. He's